Most people believe they are failing in life because they lack discipline, motivation, or consistent effort. They blame laziness, distractions, bad habits, or not wanting success badly enough to change their situation. Psychology reveals a very different explanation that feels uncomfortable but explains human behavior far more accurately. In many cases, failure is not caused by weakness, but by the mind attempting self-protection. The brain sometimes works against progress when progress feels emotionally unsafe or unpredictable. This hidden behavior is called self-sabotage, and nearly everyone experiences it at some point. Self-sabotage does not mean you want to fail or that you enjoy ruining opportunities. It means part of your mind believes success may come with emotional danger or instability. Understanding this behavior changes how you see yourself and why certain patterns keep repeating. To break self-sabotage, you must first understand why the brain learned it in the first place. Self-sabotage occurs when you delay, avoid, or destroy opportunities you genuinely desire and care about. It often appears as procrastination, perfectionism, self-doubt, or suddenly losing motivation without clear reasons. You may consciously want success while unconsciously behaving in ways that block progress. This creates frustration, confusion, and a painful sense of constantly standing in your own way. Many people interpret this pattern as proof that something is personally wrong with them. They label themselves lazy, broken, undisciplined, or incapable of long-term consistency. Psychologically, however, self-sabotage is not a personality flaw or moral failure. It is a learned behavioral response created by the brain to manage emotional risk. The brain does not prioritize happiness, fulfillment, or personal dreams when making decisions. It prioritizes familiarity, predictability, and emotional safety above all else. Sometimes staying stuck feels safer to the brain than entering unknown territory, even when the unknown could lead to success, growth, or freedom. Self-sabotage is the brain choosing emotional certainty over potential improvement. This choice happens automatically, without conscious thought or intentional decision-making. That is why willpower alone rarely solves the problem permanently. Willpower fights symptoms, but does not address the emotional root of the behavior. To change the behavior, you must understand where the emotional learning began. Self-sabotage always has a history, even if you cannot remember it clearly. That history shapes how the brain responds to opportunity, pressure, and expectation. The behavior continues because the brain believes it is still protecting you. Self-sabotage usually begins earlier in life through repeated emotional experiences and learned associations. Especially during moments when effort, visibility, or success resulted in pain or rejection. For some people, trying hard once led to embarrassment, criticism, or deep disappointment. For others, standing out attracted pressure, judgment, or unrealistic expectations from others. Over time, the brain links effort with emotional discomfort and psychological threat. It learns that avoiding effort reduces the risk of emotional pain. Failure becomes familiar, predictable, and emotionally easier to process. Familiarity feels safer to the brain than uncertainty, even when familiarity is painful. In some environments, struggle brought attention, sympathy, or emotional connection from others. Success may have created distance, isolation, or loss of support. The brain remembers emotional outcomes, not logical explanations or long-term consequences. These emotional memories are stored as survival data inside the nervous system. Later in life, similar opportunities trigger the same emotional alarms automatically, even when the current situation is safer and completely different. The brain reacts based on memory, not present reality. This reaction happens before conscious thought has time to intervene. Avoidance feels natural, logical, and justified in the moment. The person often cannot explain why they suddenly lost motivation. But the brain is responding to emotional patterns learned long ago. Self-sabotage is the echo of old emotional learning playing in new situations. Until the pattern is recognized, the brain assumes protection is still necessary. The brain is not designed to make you happy, confident, or fulfilled. Its primary responsibility is survival and emotional regulation. Survival means avoiding perceived threats, not achieving personal dreams. Emotional threats feel just as real to the brain as physical danger. Success often brings uncertainty, responsibility, and identity change. These changes feel unpredictable and risky to the nervous system. Growth requires leaving familiar identities and comfort zones behind. To the brain, unfamiliar territory feels unsafe by default. So the brain activates avoidance behaviors to regain emotional stability. Procrastination delays risk and keeps outcomes uncertain. Overthinking creates reasons to pause instead of committing. Self-doubt provides justification for stopping before exposure occurs. These behaviors feel logical, even responsible, in the moment. But they are driven by emotional memory, not present-day reality. The brain chooses what feels safe now, not what helps later. This is why insight alone can feel relieving but not immediately changing. The behavior is automatic until awareness interrupts the loop. Awareness slows the reaction long enough for choice to appear. Without awareness, the brain always defaults to learned protection. With awareness, the pattern begins losing its control. One common pattern is endlessly waiting for the perfect moment to begin. The perfect moment never arrives, and time quietly passes. Another pattern is excessive planning without meaningful execution. Planning feels productive while avoiding emotional exposure and risk. Some people sabotage themselves by setting unrealistic expectations from the beginning. When those expectations collapse, quitting feels reasonable and justified. Others quit immediately after the first sign of discomfort or resistance. Discomfort is misinterpreted as proof that something is wrong. Some people disappear as soon as progress becomes visible. Visibility brings judgment, responsibility, and expectation. For the brain, that combination feels threatening. So it pulls the person back into familiar, safer patterns. These patterns feel comfortable even while creating long-term regret. Over time, confidence slowly erodes through repeated self-interruption. Self-trust weakens with every unfinished commitment. The person begins identifying as someone who never follows through. Identity reinforces behavior, making change feel even harder. The brain prefers consistency over improvement. Even when consistency leads to dissatisfaction or self-destruction. This cycle continues quietly unless consciously interrupted. Most people repeat it without understanding why it keeps happening. Awareness is what separates repetition from transformation. Without awareness, patterns feel personal and permanent. With awareness, patterns become temporary and adjustable. The difference is understanding, not effort. Awareness is the first true interruption of self-sabotage patterns. Understanding replaces self-hatred with curiosity and clarity. You stop seeing yourself as broken or lazy. You begin observing behavior instead of attacking your identity. Observation creates emotional distance from automatic reactions. Distance weakens the power of impulsive behavior. The brain loses control when its strategies become visible. What is understood can no longer operate unconsciously. Change does not require force, pressure, or constant self-discipline. It requires patience, honesty, and repeated awareness. Each moment of awareness slightly weakens the habit loop. Over time, the brain updates what it considers safe. Growth begins feeling less dangerous and more familiar. Safety becomes progress instead of avoidance. Self-sabotage is not an enemy, but outdated protection. It once served a purpose, even if it no longer does. The goal is not to fight the mind. The goal is to understand why it learned these behaviors. The mind cannot protect you from what you clearly recognize. And recognition is always available if you are willing to observe honestly. Subscribe for more psychology facts.